No one in the neighborhood seemed to believe the flood was actually coming, and the person who doubted it most was the head of our homeowners association. When I think back on it now, that's the part that still amazes me. The warnings weren't hidden away or difficult to find. County officials had already released alerts. Every weather update painted a worse picture than the one before it. Even longtime residents who had spent decades living near the river were quietly carrying important belongings upstairs and preparing for the worst. Yet one person treated the entire situation as though it were nothing more than an annoyance. Her name was Linda Parker. As president of the HOA, she behaved as if maintaining perfect neighborhood appearances was more important than protecting the people who lived there. Seriously, the first time I heard someone joke about a flood warning, I assumed people were exaggerating. Then I witnessed everything firsthand. I still tried to warn my neighbors. 2 days later, rescue boats were drifting past the very homes Linda had insisted were completely safe. By that point, nobody cared about landscaping regulations or parking violations anymore. The neighborhood was struggling to stay alive. My name is Ethan Carter, and before all this happened, I'd lived in Willow Creek Estates for a little over 6 years. From the outside, it looked like the definition of a perfect suburban community. Every lawn was neatly maintained. Every mailbox looked freshly painted. Nearly every driveway featured the same type of expensive SUV. If someone drove through once, they probably assumed nothing bad ever happened there. The reality was very different. Behind those spotless hedges and manicured yards lived people who spent more energy worrying about HOA citations than real emergencies. That may sound exaggerated, but after everything that followed, I honestly believe it's true. Looking back now, the warning signs existed long before the storm ever arrived. Linda Parker had served as HOA president for almost 4 years. During that time, she developed a reputation everyone recognized, even if few residents were willing to challenge her directly. She loved regulations. She loved meetings. She loved mailing violation notices. And somehow she always found time to patrol the neighborhood like a security inspector conducting an official review. If someone left their trash can out 20 minutes longer than allowed, a notice appeared. If heavy rain caused grass to grow slightly above HOA standards, another notice arrived. Holiday decorations left standing one day too long, another fine. The unusual thing wasn't that she enforced rules. It was the satisfaction she seemed to get from doing it. Every minor violation felt like a personal triumph. That's how some people operate. They mistake authority for significance, and eventually they stop seeing the people they're supposed to help. For the most part, I avoided conflicts with her because of my profession. I worked as a civil engineer specializing in drainage infrastructure. Ironically, my entire career revolved around water movement, flood prevention, and stormwater systems. It wasn't glamorous work, but it meant I spent countless hours studying rainfall models, reviewing elevation data, and understanding exactly how quickly severe weather could turn into a disaster. That's why the forecast immediately grabbed my attention. Meteorologists were no longer discussing an ordinary storm. Every new update increased the projected rainfall totals. The County Emergency Management Office issued flood advisories much earlier than normal. Local news stations began interviewing officials who openly warned that low-lying communities could experience flooding unlike anything seen in years if conditions continued to worsen. Honestly, whenever professionals start using phrases like historic flooding and once-in-a-generation event, I pay attention. One evening after work, I drove to the small river that bordered our subdivision. Even before the heaviest rain arrived, the water level was noticeably higher than normal. Several large branches rushed downstream far faster than I'd ever seen before, and the current looked unusually powerful. I pulled over and spent a few minutes comparing what I was seeing with historical flood maps on my phone. The moment I did, a knot formed in my stomach. Willow Creek Estates wasn't located directly on the riverbank, but all the neighborhood's drainage ponds were connected through underground channels that eventually emptied into that river. If the river rose high enough and backed up into the system, those drainage networks could stop functioning properly. The water wouldn't remain confined near the river. It would spread into streets that had never experienced flooding before. The following morning, I sent a detailed email to the HOA board outlining my concerns. I wasn't trying to create panic. I attached publicly available county flood projections, recent weather forecasts, and recommendations advising residents to move valuable belongings away from ground floors. I even offered to help coordinate sandbag distribution if enough neighbors wanted to participate. To me, it seemed like basic common sense. It's always better to prepare for a disaster that never comes than to ignore one that does. That's exactly the point. In my mind, being prepared for a disaster that never happens is always better than being caught off guard when it does. Honestly, I expected the HOA board to send a brief reply thanking me for sharing the information and perhaps encouraging residents to stay informed. Instead, a few hours later, every homeowner in Willow Creek Estates received an official email from Linda. According to her message, there was no confirmed emergency threatening our neighborhood. She reminded residents that unapproved sandbags, temporary flood barriers, and visible plastic coverings were considered violations of community appearance guidelines. She went even further. Linda warned that any homeowner who placed unattractive emergency materials in visible areas could be subject to fines once neighborhood inspections resumed. I remember reading the email twice because I genuinely thought I had misunderstood it the first time. County officials were urging people to prepare for possible flooding, yet our HOA president seemed more concerned about whether a pile of sandbags would damage the neighborhood's image. The community Facebook page erupted within minutes. Several residents agreed with my concerns and started posting links to official forecasts, county advisories, and emergency management updates. Others immediately sided with Linda. They argued that the news exaggerated every storm, that weather forecasts were frequently wrong, and that unnecessary panic would only create problems. Very quickly, the discussion stopped being about safety. It became about pride. Many residents simply didn't want to admit that something serious could happen because doing so would mean accepting that our expensive, carefully maintained community might not be as secure as everyone believed. That kind of mindset is dangerous. Nature doesn't care how perfect a neighborhood looks. Reality doesn't change because people choose not to believe it. Despite the pushback, I spent the remainder of the afternoon going door to door. A few neighbors listened. Several began carrying boxes upstairs immediately after our conversations. One elderly couple thanked me for taking the time to explain the drainage maps because they had never realized their property sat in one of the lowest sections of the subdivision. A young family carefully moved photo albums, keepsakes, and important documents into second-floor bedrooms after I showed them projected flood routes and elevation data. Those conversations gave me some relief. At least a few people were taking reasonable precautions. Then I arrived at Linda's house. She was standing outside supervising landscapers who were replacing decorative flowers near the neighborhood entrance. Dark storm clouds were already building across the horizon, yet she seemed completely focused on maintaining appearances. When she noticed the printed flood maps tucked under my arm, she didn't ask what I had discovered. She didn't ask about rainfall projections. She didn't ask whether conditions had changed. Instead, she smirked. Then she laughed loudly enough for nearby residents to hear. The concern I had been expressing for days had become the neighborhood's latest joke. That moment stayed with me, because it wasn't simple skepticism anymore. It was certainty. Linda genuinely believed nothing serious could happen, and unfortunately, quite a few people believed her as well. As evening approached, the sky darkened even further. The first heavy drops finally began striking rooftops, driveways, and sidewalks. None of us realized we had already passed a point where early preparation could have made the biggest difference. The rain didn't arrive as a sudden wall of water. At first, it felt like a typical storm. Roads became slick and reflective. Gutters filled steadily. Thunder echoed in the distance every few minutes. But by the following morning, something felt wrong. The rain never eased. It never slowed. It never moved away. It simply continued falling hour after hour, as though an endless storm system had parked itself directly above Willow Creek Estates. Before breakfast, I checked the latest county rainfall data. My heart sank immediately. We had already exceeded the normal monthly rainfall average, and meteorologists were warning that the most intense bands of precipitation had not even reached us yet. That's the kind of report you never want to see. Once the soil becomes completely saturated, every additional inch of rain creates exponentially greater risk. The ground loses its ability to absorb water. Runoff increases. Drainage systems become overwhelmed. And conditions can deteriorate frighteningly fast. I stepped outside to inspect the neighborhood. Almost immediately, I noticed standing water collecting in locations that had always remained dry during previous storms. The drainage pond near the entrance had risen several feet overnight. More concerning, the water wasn't flowing away the way it normally would. It was barely moving. The moment I saw that, my biggest fear was confirmed. The river was beginning to overwhelm the entire drainage system. The river downstream had started backing up, which meant the entire drainage network was losing its ability to move water away from the neighborhood. The best comparison I can give is a sink with a clogged drain. You can keep pouring water into it for a while, but eventually there's nowhere left for that water to go. When that happens, everything spills over the edges. That was exactly what I feared was beginning to happen. I immediately started calling neighbors I had spoken with the previous day. I urged them to finish moving valuables upstairs and be ready to leave if evacuation orders were issued. Some appreciated the warning. Others admitted they wished they had started preparing sooner. But plenty of residents still insisted that Linda knew what she was doing and that everything would be fine. Then another HOA email arrived. Once again, it was sent to every homeowner in the neighborhood. And once again, it completely ignored emergency planning. Rather than discussing flood safety, Linda reminded residents that portable generators, utility trailers, and temporary storage containers were prohibited if they were visible from the street. She even included a statement emphasizing the importance of maintaining the neighborhood's high visual standards despite the ongoing weather situation. I stared at the message in disbelief. Emergency crews across the county were already responding to flooded intersections and water rescues. Yet somehow our HOA president remained focused on curb appeal. That email spread to the community faster than the storm itself. For the first time, even some of Linda's strongest supporters began questioning whether she understood how serious the situation had become. By late afternoon, the first street flooded. At first, it didn't seem dramatic. Only a few inches of water crept over the curb and spread across the pavement. Then another road disappeared beneath murky brown water. Mailboxes reflected off the surface. Vehicles parked along the street suddenly appeared much lower than they had earlier that morning. The constant sound of rain blended with distant emergency sirens until the two became almost impossible to distinguish. Standing on my front porch and watching water slowly creep closer to every driveway, I felt a chill run through me. A realization hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't the disaster I had been warning people about. This was only the beginning. By the second night, Willow Creek Estates no longer resembled the neighborhood everyone had been so proud of. Roads had transformed into swift channels of muddy water. Several parked vehicles sat partially submerged. Power outages began spreading block by block throughout the subdivision. Emergency alerts echoed from countless cell phones, instructing residents in vulnerable areas to move to higher ground immediately. Then came the moment nobody expected to see. Rescue boats entered the neighborhood. They navigated between street signs, fences, and floating trash containers in areas where families had been walking only days before. I still struggle to believe how quickly everything unraveled. The most shocking development involved Linda Parker herself. One of the first homes completely surrounded by floodwater belonged to the HOA president, the same person who had dismissed warnings, criticized emergency preparations, and threatened fines now found herself trapped inside her own house. She was stranded on the second floor waiting for emergency crews to reach her. Nobody took pleasure in seeing someone placed in danger. But the irony was impossible to ignore. The homes protected by sandbags, the same sandbags Linda had mocked, were holding up far better than expected. Her own property had no such protection. Nothing slowed the advancing water. Honestly, this part felt unreal because reality delivered consequences far more effectively than any argument ever could. As rescue crews worked tirelessly to evacuate residents, one thing became crystal clear. The storm didn't care about job titles. It didn't care about HOA authority. It didn't care about neighborhood appearances, landscaping standards, or community image. Nature treated everyone exactly the same. And when the flood finally arrived, the difference came down to one thing: preparation. The people who listened to warnings had a better chance of protecting their homes and belongings. The people who ignored them paid a much higher price. Eventually, the rain stopped. The floodwaters slowly receded. But when they did, Willow Creek Estates looked nothing like the polished community it had once been. The damage was everywhere. Within a few weeks, Linda quietly stepped down as HOA president. No one argued with the decision. No one tried to stop her. Residents had seen enough. The homeowners who prepared early recovered much faster than those who focused on appearances instead of practical action. In the end, that became the biggest lesson of all. Common sense will always matter more than appearances. Sometimes karma doesn't arrive through revenge or punishment. Sometimes reality simply exposes a truth for everyone to see. Looking back, this entire experience proves a simple point. Ignoring expert warnings never changes reality. It only determines who ends up paying the price when reality arrives. Even now, the whole situation is hard to believe because so much of it could have been prevented. A little preparation would have made an enormous difference. Instead, pride got in the way. And when the flood came, pride offered no protection at all. If you enjoyed this HOA Revenge story, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more unbelievable HOA karma stories every week.